And now, live from the Man Cave, Studio B, deep in the heart of constitutional Livingston County, Michigan. It's time for another. This is my brain Sunday night conversation with Jaco. I asked you how to say it, and now I read it again and messed it up.
That's okay.
Kleyhans.
It's real old German, you know, so it's Kleyhans.
Yeah, and Ben Wetmore, correct? Okay, and we're live. I'm going to get to the correct screen up here so people can see you. Let's see. We're going to go to the table there. There we go. All right, there we go. Jaco's here. I'll do this real quick just for our normal audience to know that we haven't departed from our regular schedule or our regular programming. Just 1 second. Here we go. Whoops. That's not right. Thank you. I opened up a window in the wrong spot. How dare I? I'm a one-man show tonight. There we go. Okay. Notice, here it is. Notice and wall feed. Notice this podcast is raw, unfiltered, politically, whatever. I can't even say my own notice this afternoon. This podcast is raw, unfiltered, politically incorrect. We say Merry Christmas, the Pledge of Allegiance, especially the part about one nation under God. We thank our troops for their service. We only recognize two genders. As adults, we enjoy adult beverages. Today, it's water and water. We cuss. We do not curse or swear. Look up the definitions of those. We love Jesus, but we hate religion and religious. Oh, this is the old copy. Religious hypocrites. I changed that word. If this offends you, you can leave now. And for all my loyal audience out there, you know about that notice. And for those of you tuning in fresh today, I apologize in advance, but then again, we don't apologize. So let's see if I can switch back to the right screen. Let's try that one. Oh, that's me. Okay, we'll go back to the table. Well, welcome, Jaco. I didn't get a chance to really connect with you before the show started, other than to do a bit of a sound check. But talking with Ben, he filled me in a little bit. So let's start there. Obviously, we're talking about it tonight. I titled the show tonight, the South African Genocide, but I know there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more going on. This has been spurred by Trump stepping forward and really putting forth more than an olive branch, a lifeline to a lot of the farmers out there. But I want to get it from your perspective before we dive into a whole list of questions and then bounce back and forth between the three of us and see what we've got. And then maybe we'll see some chat come in and go from there. So Jaco, where do you want to start with what we're doing tonight?
Yes, maybe certainly with the American reaction, especially from President Trump on what's happening in South Africa. I think that's really important, you know. I mean, there was this whole idea in America, like in Europe and many other Western countries, that after the end of apartheid in 1994, in South Africa was just the kind of dream nation, you know. It was called a rainbow nation, the example of Western liberal democracy in Africa, just a perfect place, you know. And America was able to move on, you know. I remember the whole Clinton years in the 1990s saying, you know, that South Africa was now a country that America could look at, you know, of how we were supposed to do things. But what happened in the last 30 years since we have so-called democracy in South Africa? What happened in the last 30 years is that we had a completely corrupt government, a socialist government. You can even call them to a certain extent a communist government, implementing laws against the white minority in South Africa, constant discrimination against whites on everything from education in schools, access to universities, access to simple things as water rights for farmers, mineral rights, the right to own land, to get basic services like welfare payments. There's been discrimination in the last 3 decades against the white minority in South Africa, and that also then came with hatred. You've probably saw the song that they sing about
Yeah.
Kill the Farmer in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reality is that 3,000 farmers were killed out of 30,000 in South Africa in the last 3 decades.
Wow.
And the first American president who were willing to talk about that were Donald Trump. So President Trump, just after he became president, now again in January this year, was willing to speak out about this. He signed an executive order supporting our people in South Africa. And yes, we're very thankful about that.
It seems like there's a lot of praise. I mean, it was amazing if you saw any of the footage of his recent trip where he was in the Middle East, specifically in Saudi Arabia, and they came in there and just, I mean, the troops for Saudi Arabia were saluting him. It was amazing, and he's talking the way he talks, and I thought it was quite interesting the way he was doing it. I wanted to dive into a couple things. Well, so on that point, is that kind of universal over there, Jaco, with the people and their appreciation of President Trump and what he's trying to do?
Yes, absolutely. I always tell Americans, that I think the Afrikaners, my people, and we've been in Africa and in South Africa for 370 years. We're descendants of the Dutch, German, and the French Huguenots. My people are probably some of the most supportive people of President Trump. I'm a great supporter of President Trump. I've attended his last rally there in Grand Rapids in November last year,
awesome.
In the early morning hours before the election. But the Afrikaners and our people truly love President Trump and his movement, and the conservative movement in America, but especially the fact that, and I like your reference in your intro, about your podcast also, those Americans, those people in the Trump movement who are willing to speak out in a politically incorrect way about the realities in the world today. We live in a world where our civilization are under attack, our way of life, our way of doing are under attack, and there's few examples as good as the one in South Africa of what happened to a Western civilization in South Africa that's been under attack by the left-wing organized groups in the world, like the Soros groups and others, for the last few decades. So while you're having the fight in America, we've had the same fight now for a few decades. We've been under immense pressure. And I think in that sense, we are really very happy with what President Trump has been willing to say and do with his executive order about South Africa, about the situation with South African farmers, his willingness to offer even status to some of our people who were fleeing the country. And that the first group of those people arrived in America just a few days ago.
Absolutely. So do you think there was there any type of change in your opinion, or was it pretty consistent before Trump made this move? What was the flavor before that? Obviously it would be higher now, but was there, what was the feeling towards Trump before that? Was it, give me your thoughts on that, what you observed.
Yeah, no, it's been very positive. I remember during the first term of President Trump, after he was elected in 2016, Afrikaners were very hopeful about President Trump, and that he could be really the one world leader who step in for us. It's my job. I'm the head of international liaison for the largest Afrikaner organization. So I go around the world and talk about our case, our story. And I've been to so many European countries. I just came back from Europe again a few days ago, and we've been lobbying the Dutch and the Germans and many other people. But in the first term of President Trump, I knew that there was a good chance that we really now had a leader who were willing to talk about what's happening in South Africa. The problem was the people in the administration. We must be very honest about that. We as an organization engaged with John Bolton during the first Trump term.
Yeah.
And at that time, he was still the the security advisor, and you know how that turned out. He recently referred to my people as one of the most racist groups in the world. I mean, that's absolute crazy nonsense. But he spoke to us during the first term, and then he went behind our backs and told lies to President Trump. So I think what is very important is that President Trump has a so much better team this time around. I think that was the problem during the first term. The deep state was everywhere. They were in the State Department, even in the White House. And this time it's different. President Trump knew what to do. He knew who to appoint, and now you have people in the Trump administration who also understand what's happening in South Africa. And I think that's the big difference.
Absolutely. And as you said, you went to Grand Rapids, so I knew you were already looking at Trump. And it's amazing to see what other people, how they view America, especially when we deal with our leftist news rags around here that just say that everybody hates us and there's true. I mean, we've gone into countries and taken them over, and Afghanistan and Iraq and things like that, and we've certainly shot ourselves in the foot or wherever body part you want to pick. I wanted to ask you a couple things about that. About one, I want to touch on the racism dynamic, because that is one of the big things. And of course, over here in America, if you say anything the left doesn't like, you're a racist no matter what. So I want to touch on that, and then I want to get into. I've heard a couple different explanations of apartheid, and I've done cursory studies of it in the past. The Morgan Freeman movie comes out, and so you're a little aware of the Hollywood version of that story. But I've heard good and bad. Obviously, the bad is what you mostly hear, but I've heard that there was actually some really good things in there. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. I want to hear from you. But let's start with the racism dynamic of there, because, and I'll preface it this way: you guys are the indigenous, German and Dutch descendants, the Afrikaners, right? You guys, you're 400 years, maybe more. Correct?
Yes, absolutely. Our first descendants arrived in South Africa in 1652, April 1652.
Okay.
And we have much of the same descendancy than many Americans. We just speak a different language that are very close to Dutch.
Yeah.
But we arrived in what is today Cape Town. To mostly an empty country, and that is a very politically incorrect thing to say, because the story told today and what children in South Africa are taught in history classes today is that our people arrived here in 1652 and we came here and we stole all the wonderful things from the black people who lived here, their schools and their railways and their roads and their towns that were non-existent at that time. It was mostly an empty country. There were a small group of nomadic people called the Bushmen, and they are today the colored people in South Africa. But most of the black people who live in South Africa today came from Central Africa. They came from places like the Congo.
Right.
And when the whites arrived in what is today South Africa, there were only black people in the furthest northern and northeastern parts of South Africa. So when our people as farmers moved into the inland of South Africa, there were only this very, very small nomadic Bushman people, but the black people were not there yet, and it took another more than 150 years before the whites really engaged with black people when they met them much, much further inland in South Africa. So many of the places where white people are farming today and where the media, the left-wing media also in America are telling you that whites came to steal the land, and we stole the land from the blacks, when our people arrived here where I'm sitting now, in the central parts of South Africa, there were no one here. It was an empty country. Our people came here. We worked this country. At the end, we made deals with some of the local tribes. But yes, that's the story, of South Africa, like it is the story of America and so many other places. There's a certain message that the left-wing media wants to convey. And the story that they told was whites came to South Africa, they stole the land, they took everything from the black people. At the end, they created apartheid. And then the leftists came to save South Africa. They came to save South Africa. They forced us to give up our land in 1994. That's the left-wing story.
Yeah, and Jaco, you mentioned to me before that the reason for that is the country's very dry, and so there was never a lot of settlement before. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. So it's really, if you think in American terms, I've been to 36 American states, and I would say that most of South Africa looks like Western Texas, like the western parts of Texas, the Panhandle. I was last year in Amarillo. When I drive to a city like Amarillo, that's what large parts of South Africa looks like, Western Texas, parts of Arizona and New Mexico, an extremely dry country. And that's why many of the black tribes in Africa didn't move to South Africa. They stayed more in Central Africa and a little further north in what is today countries like Mozambique, Malawi, Tanzania, and Botswana, those countries. So South Africa was really a dry, empty country. It's until today a very difficult country to be a farmer in. And that is why South African farmers, in my view, are some of the best farmers in the world. They know how to work in extremely difficult conditions, very dry climate, constantly being under physical attack, very dangerous situations. And to be honest, there's today 10,000 young South African farmers working on American farms. When you drive through America, you find in every state, every part of every state, you find young South African, Afrikaner farmers working there on the farms, because people, and I think American farmers understand that our people are very adaptive. They can work very well. They're hardworking. They're honest. Yes, I think that's why there's such an important link between our people and your people. And when I refer to your people, I'm talking about Americans who are patriotic, Americans who care about their country and the future of their country.
Absolutely.
And not to go into the history too much, but just to clarify, because I think it does kind of set the stage for the political dynamic and really some parallels to America, Jaco. My understanding is in the 1920s or so, a lot of the folks who were brought in from other parts of Africa, but also from all around the world, were really done so by the big corporations for cheap labor. And these people were brought in, changed the dynamic of the country. And so within 50 years, the entire dynamic of South Africa changed, where the native population, the Dutch farmers, suddenly got politically dispossessed. And, maybe, and I'm not trying to defend apartheid, but, bringing in a large number of foreign people into a country certainly has major political consequences. And, that's what we're seeing here in America, where we have
not quite the level of replacement migration that we're experiencing now, but definitely that dynamic of bringing in cheap labor, which we've seen for 20, 30 years here or more. But so what's responding to that, Jaco, just the idea of bringing in this cheap labor and changing the dynamics even more than the tribes, as you said, that your ancestors and them generally worked things out and cooperated, whereas you bring in a bunch of replacement workers at lower wages, you're going to have issues.
Absolutely. Very, very important point. I think that's probably one of the most important lessons from the South African history. If you go back 125 years ago, when we still had our so-called Boer republics, we had a republic in the north of the country, the Transvaal Republic, and we had the Free State Republic. We, as a people, the Afrikaners, were in the majority in those republics. In most parts of South Africa, we were demographically in the majority, and we controlled those lands. Then we had two wars against the English, and when I talk about the English here, it was actually the first phases of internationalism, of globalism. It were the drivers behind mining, and people who wanted to control our mining assets, our gold and our platinum. And we had a war against the English. We lost the second war, in which 15% of our people died in concentration camps, English concentration camps. And then after that war, 124 years ago, you saw the industrialization of South Africa. The big mining companies moved in. They industrialized South Africa, and then you had these people who just streamed into South Africa from especially other parts of Africa, but even from India. Today you have an Indian population in South Africa. They came in. They were brought in by the English. People from all over, especially Central Africa, were brought into South Africa, and we became a minority in our own country. And that took decades. And that's my message for the Americans as it is for Europeans. I see what's happening in Europe at the moment. Let's be honest. The Dutch will be a minority in their own country within the next few decades. The Germans will become a minority within their own country within the next few decades. To give you just one interesting number, by 1994, at the end of apartheid, there were 43 million people in South Africa. No, 40 million people in South Africa. Today, we are at 63 million. That's a growth of 23 million people, from 40 million to 63 million people in 30 years. And all those people came from Central Africa, from the Middle East. You have today in every town in South Africa communities of Pakistanis, people from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, from China, from all places where when I was a child, 35, 40 years ago, I never knew people from those places, So we were replaced as we were 125 years ago, a majority. And today in every single town, every community in South Africa, our people are a small minority. That can happen. It's not 10 or 20 years, but in 100 years' time, you can become a minority in your own country.
And I think that's a big dynamic to look at it, because as you noted, told us the history. There was nobody there. So when your ancestors settled that land, nobody was there. Whereas when the Europeans came to America, predominantly the Europeans came to America, there were indigenous tribes here. So there were treaties, there were things, and obviously there was, a lot of wrongdoing on both sides. But if you look at it, the French and Indian Wars, you look at a lot of things that went on in the first colonies. It wasn't just coming and kicking the natives off the land. There was a lot of cooperation, and there was a lot of assimilation. There was a lot of working together. And those tribes, most of the native tribes, were fighting with. There was, you could say it was the first civil war that the Europeans ever encountered here, was throughout the Americas, because these tribes were fighting with themselves. What amazes me is how they label it racist. They label it this, that you have no right to be there, that you are, you're not the original, when you are. And I think that's one of the biggest lies for me, on top of all of this, is that they're trying to, just as much as they do in America, where they twist the history, they're bold-faced lying about the history, saying that the blacks were there first. And it's just not true. And I even the phrase Afrikaner, people don't even understand this in America, that word, just that designation there. They don't understand the Dutch. They don't understand that this was an arid place, that these awesome farmers, I mean, where are the Dutch landmass? They're tiny, but as far as farming, aren't they second in the world for agricultural exportation? Or export. That's phenomenal. And I heard somebody this past week, because everybody's talking about it on different podcasts and stuff, and they said, you know what? The interesting thing is it is their native land. They've grown up 400 years there. But if you remove them and you put them somewhere else that was arid and dry, within a generation, they would have it cultivated and be growing crops, because that's how they are. And the people that would come in and usurp that land, take that land, force you out of that land, they would destroy it in less than a generation. It would be a matter of a year or two, and it would be destroyed and not producing anything. And that's amazing. That's amazing testimony. And it's getting just covered up with these lies. And I think that's one of the things that bothers me, other than the literal killing. It's the lies about true history, because we've been lied to so much about all of our histories, to find out what's really going on.
Jeremy, just to that point, something that Jaco told me before is that there was a very small native group of Black Bushmen, right?
Yeah.
And I think, Jaco, they're called the Kosian people, right?
Yes,
And
yes, that's right.
the Black majority in South Africa is very racist towards whites, right? They,
Yeah.
they do a lot of things nasty towards whites.
Yeah.
But according to what Jaco told me, they treat the Kosian even worse than the whites.
Right. Probably because they're the type of people that accept anybody and just, as Dr. King said, judge you for your character, the
Right.
content of your character, not the color of your skin. They're probably the same people, those Bushmen. They're like, hey, if you're not messing with me, I'm not messing with you. We're going to get along. And then you've got this other group of predominantly aggressive people. It's the same in China. There's 3 million Uyghur Muslims in slave camps in China, and the Chinese are some of the most racist people that you'll ever come across. And then we're going to buy their products and support their economy and stuff like that. And it's kind of the Trumpian idea. We all just want to get along.
Right.
So stop this. And I think that's what he kept having to say it in the press conferences. He's like, I don't care if they're okay, they're white, great, but they could be Black, they could be this. They're being genocided and kicked off their ancestral lands that they've been on for more than 400 years. What are we doing? Of course, we're going to open our doors, and we're the ones opening the doors versus them jumping in a bunch of boats and coming over. And even in that case, if that was the case, they would truly be asylum seekers. They would truly be people that should be received in that way versus somebody just pouring across the border because George Soros gave them a credit card and a cell phone, and they're gonna come across here. Any more thoughts on that, Jaco?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. If you look at the 59 Afrikaner refugees that arrived in America recently, they were waving American flags. They love America. They're thankful towards America. When I visit America, and I do that once a year, I see large numbers of asylum seekers and illegal immigrants in your country who hate America. They despise America, They are waving flags of Middle Eastern countries, of other nations, They hate your leader. And that is what makes me angry at the media. Last week in a CNN panel discussion, there was also a panelist who said that these Afrikaners must go back to Germany and give up this land that they stole. And that's an absolute lie. I can't speak German. I have nothing in Germany that I can go back to. I've been here for close to 400 years. So we need to fight the media narrative.
Yeah.
You talk about the Soroses, and their foundation. Soros and his foundation has been very active in South Africa for the last few decades. Instigating against the white minority, supporting extreme leftist media. I can name you the media sources, the amount of money that they get from Soros, but also the amount of money that they received from USAID during the Joe Biden years. There was a huge USAID office in our capital city, Pretoria.
Surprise.
All the leftist organizations in South Africa received your taxpayer money. They received money from USAID for things like gender studies at the University of Cape Town, for all kinds of crazy leftist projects, but especially to fight the conservative Afrikaner minority in South Africa. And I think that is the big change that we're seeing in South Africa, but around the world, is that the Trump administration is putting a stop to that. And I think that's why you see all the desperation in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, all these articles about the terrible Afrikaners and the so-called truth about South Africa. I think it is because Trump is not only draining the swamp in Washington, D.C., he's doing it around the world.
Absolutely, and that's a huge dynamic. It's a ripple effect. It's what's that? There's a phrase. A rising tide raises all ships. But there's another phrase that just escaped me as I was thinking of it. But the idea that when even as Reagan said, we're the shining city on the hill. Is that what Reagan? Get that quote right. Anyways, but that idea that what the neocons and the warmongers wanted was to spread their form of Americanism throughout the world, through war, through through sanction, through domination of other countries. Whereas you look at Trump, and he's truly he's spreading that Americanism, or that I don't even like, we personify it as Americanism, but it really is just people being the best that they can be and being true to themselves in their own countries. And I think it's contagious. And when people see somebody that's free, see somebody that is strong as a leader, they want to rally to that. They want to emulate that. They want to experience that type of freedom and strength in their own lives. I want to pivot a little bit to apartheid, but I wanted to, because you touched on the Dutch farmers. Is there anything on the Dutch farmers, Jaco, that you wanted to expound on a little bit more of that? Just because we know that, like we said, there, within a year or two of them taking over farms, these farms are destroyed. They don't have that ancestral. I grew up on a farm from the age, my mom remarried when I was 10. And I grew up on a farm from the ages of 10 to 19, and then it was really connected. We had 120 acres on one side and then 80 acres on another side. And so I was right there on the farm experiencing that, and watched my adopted grandpa Gibbs, going out there and pruning the trees and putting, he would put this tar mix that he had on the bottom of the fruit trees so that the bugs would get caught and they wouldn't, and just watching him do that, and then going out with one of my one uncle, and we'd walk out in the field, and he'd just grab a ear of corn right off the stalk and take a big bite out of it, because that sweet corn was phenomenal. But then we had to check all the other things, and so you don't get that. You can't get that in a book. You've got to live that. It's almost like the animals, that you have chickens that have been raised in cages for generation after generation after generation, and you put a picture, not even a real hawk, you put a shadow picture of a hawk on the ceiling of that barn, and they will all run. You could put other pictures up there, they don't care. You put a picture of a hawk up there flying by, and they'll run, because it's in their DNA, it's in their ancestral thing. And I'm looking at, these Dutch farmers, and looking at it and going, there's a dynamic there where they have an inherent, almost in their DNA, ancestral lineage of farming. And I wanted you to speak to that for just a minute, because they're feeding the rest of the population down there, and they don't know that they're destroying their own food supply.
No, you're absolutely right. That's such an important point you're making. And what is also important to understand about the left is, in the first place, they don't understand where food comes from. People don't, in the cities, in urban areas, don't know where food comes from anymore. They think it's produced in factories.
Right.
I grew up on a dairy farm, and farming is in our blood. It's part of who we are. It's in our DNA. But the attack on the farm, on farmers, on family farmers in South Africa, as in America and many other places, are part of the leftist attack on our traditions and our identity and who we are. We saw that in Europe over the last few years with the European Union and their constant attack on farmers, with all kinds of leftist green policies and people not allowed to use fertilizer anymore and all those kinds of things. And in a country like the Netherlands, you now have a situation where they want to buy out farmers. But what happened in South Africa in the last 3 decades? So yes, the population is exploding with immigrants from all over Africa and the Middle East. We are standing now at more than 63 million people. We have less than 30,000 commercial farmers left in South Africa, and we are still an agricultural export country. So we even export agricultural products to America. We will soon, within the next month or two, our farmers will export oranges and other citrus fruits to America. We export avocados to America, to many, many countries around the world. So
wait, Jaco, I got to stop you. Right there. You're telling me avocados grow somewhere else other than Mexico?
Yes, absolutely.
Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
And they're not, and you're not Spanish. You're not of Spanish descent doing avocado. You're blowing my mind here, buddy. Continue. Sorry, I hope I didn't break your train of thought, but I had to point that out.
So to give you an idea, so South African farmers work in these extremely difficult conditions. It's very dry. The population is growing. There's more and more pollution. We have all these slums around the cities. It becomes really unsafe. There's once a week a farm attack in South Africa. At least every second day a farm attack. There's one farmer getting killed every week in South Africa.
Wow.
Last year it was 52 farmers who were killed brutally. I'm talking about brutal torture. People are tortured for hours, and then killed on their farms. And despite all of that, we are still an agricultural export country. Now, what the political elite are now saying and what they're doing, they say, we stole this land, we stole all these farms, and we need to give it back to the black population. Though in most of these areas, I would say 70 to 80% of the areas of South Africa where our people are farming today, they were never black people 150 or 200 years ago. So what they did over the last 30 years, they were started to buy up farms. So they bought the farms of white farmers, in many instances for much less than market value. And most of that farmland, it's 2.5 million hectares of farmland,
Wow.
today just lies barren. It's not used in any way. You must see that. I always show that to international visitors. I take them to some of these farms that were highly productive farms 10 or 15 years ago. The South African government bought those farms. They gave it to black communities. They sold all the tractors, all the everything that they could sell on those farms. And today there's absolutely nothing happening on those farms. At the moment, there's 800 such farms that were very large commercial white-owned farms. The government bought those farms, and now they're not happy with that. So what are they doing now? They recently signed a new expropriation act. So they want to now expropriate land. They want to take the land, forcefully take land from South African farmers. And they say, we will pay you compensation, but the compensation can be as low as zero.
Oh,
So the
wow.
act in this new act, this compensation act that were approved by the South African Parliament, they say that they will look at the compensation, but it may even be as low as zero. So that is what's happening currently in South Africa with our farmers.
Wow. All right, going back to something we've already touched on, but I want to elaborate on apartheid. And Ben, you brought it up, some of the dynamics of that, but I really want to I want to flesh this out a little bit. What apartheid looked like from somebody who grew up there and experienced that, because it's obviously been vilified as an absolute evil and there was nothing good about it. But it seems that we've come to understand that there were some really good dynamics of it. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. I want to know, obviously, no matter what apartheid was, what you have now is tyrannical and despotic, and is allowing lawlessness to prevail, or even state-sponsored terrorism to prevail towards the white Afrikaners there. So I wanted to get your take, and Ben, if chime in too, just on this idea of apartheid. Help educate me a little bit more on it, because I have, like I said, I have a cursory view of apartheid, and I always felt like we're not getting the whole story on what's really going on here. So go ahead, Jaco, on that.
Yes, like with many things in history, I mean, it's so easy to criminalize a part of a people's history, and like you've said, I mean, and I will be honest, not everything during apartheid were perfect, but let's be honest that there was a reason that we had apartheid in South Africa after the wars that we fought against the English. When all that urbanization and industrialization happened, you had all this millions of people who flooded into South Africa, into all our urban areas, and somehow it had to be structured, and there had to be a system to control this inflow of people, and that were called apartheid. There were places designated for all these people who came to South Africa to live and to work. But if you go back to the 1980s, and I still remember the 1980s, I was in school in the 1980s, in most areas in terms of infrastructure, education, but especially safety, South Africa were a much, much better country. Though we had all the sanctions against us, American sanctions, European sanctions against us, you can read it up about President Ronald Reagan tried to veto some of those sanctions, but his veto was overridden by the American Congress, because Reagan, as well as Margaret Thatcher, said that if the ANC gets control of South Africa, they will destroy South Africa. There's a very good speech of Ronald Reagan that you can still read on the internet, and also a very good speech or two of Margaret Thatcher, who said that. So black education, the education of black children in South Africa, were better during apartheid than what it is now. Per capita, less black people were killed and murdered during apartheid than the murders today. We have more than 27,000 people murdered in South Africa annually. We have the second highest murder rate in the world after Ecuador in Central America. We have the highest rape rate in the world. Most women in South Africa are raped of any country in the world. Our infrastructure are falling apart. When you visit South Africa, people will see that. We have constant blackouts. There's not enough electricity. Water are polluted. The roads are falling apart. When you try to drive around South Africa, it's impossible to drive in certain parts of the country. Our government debt is out of control. The government find it extremely difficult every month just to borrow enough money to pay welfare. We have in South Africa, of the 63 million people in our country, 27 million people are dependent on welfare. That's grants that are paid out to them every month.
Wow.
We only have 7 million taxpayers, individual taxpayers who pay taxes like myself, you know. So
Out of
it's a
63, you
country
said?
that is out of control.
Yeah, 7 million out of 63. You said the
Yes.
current population is 63 million. That
Yes.
is amazing. So apartheid in your core, and Ben, chime in here if you want to help, it was really a justifiable separating of. Would that be a right way to say it? I mean, we do it subtly here. Yeah. We do it, where they have projects, and you know that those urban areas, the projects, they call them the projects, and that's where mostly a lot of black people or Hispanics in some areas, that's where they end up congregating, is in these projects. It's low income and lower housing and everything like that. And then the the outer areas, the rural areas, are the ones that have the more affluent people. So what I'm getting from you is that apartheid was a system designed to kind of keep the influx of people of lower income in certain areas versus just flooding the entire country. Is that an okay general overview, or is there more to it? Am I missing it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that is as simple as when you go back to the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. That was the reason. You had large numbers of people flooding into South Africa to work on the gold mines, to work on the coal mines, and later also the platinum mines. And somehow it had to be structured. But then there was also the fear that if you just gave citizenship and voting rights to all of these people, then they will take over the country. And to be honest, their political party, the African National Congress, which is the largest political party today in South Africa, they had links with the Soviets. They were communists. Well, they're still communists today. That's very important to understand. But they were communists. And that is why Ronald Reagan said in the 1980s, we can't allow these people to take control of South Africa. Yes, South Africa need to change. And we as Afrikaners tried to change it. We tried a more federal system. We tried to give the different black tribes more control of their own lands, of their own countries. We even had white farmers moving off certain lands so that we can give certain parts of the country, say, to the Zulu tribe or the Xhosa tribe, and we called that homeland. So all these black tribes had their homelands with their own governments, but that were not enough. For the leftists in especially the Western countries. They had to fight the system, and at the end just all made everything about racism, and that this was against race, about racism, and a fight, an international fight against racism. But you're absolutely right. It was a system implemented 120 years ago to try and control the enormous inflow in South Africa by people who came from all over Southern Africa.
Which is totally different than what we experienced here in America, where you had an enslaved population that was then liberated, and then Jim Crow laws were brought in and told you couldn't use this. Wait, were we set free or were we not? And so it created an underclass of people that were enslaved. It's a totally different dynamic of a group of people that are coming into the country that were not there before, or were brought in to be wage slaves, and then all of a sudden you've got to create a system to go, all right, we can't handle just them flooding into everywhere, and like you said, they're trying to work it out. We've got to flip this whole narrative continually on its head, because they keep saying, well, you usurped the land, and apartheid was this, and apartheid was like, wait a minute, dude. If I got a new neighbor that moves in next to me and he's got 10 dogs, and we didn't have dogs next to us beforehand, well, of course, I may have to get to a situation with my neighbor where I go, dude, you got to put up at least an invisible fence or some kind of barrier, because your dogs keep running over here, and I didn't have this situation before you moved in. Nothing against you personally, or how the whole. I'm making a very light example of it, but the idea is you got a whole bunch of people that are coming in that are not indigenous to that area, and are all of a sudden demanding certain things. You're like, listen, we got to have a structure here, or we're going to jack everything up. And as you said, you even gave them different lands. I wonder, what the track records of I think you said the Zulu tribes and a few of the other tribes that were given farmland. How's that farmland today? Because you've already alluded to some of the farmlands that's just empty tracts now, that's useless.
Yeah, it's mostly empty today. You can drive to a province like the Eastern Cape province, that's in the southeast of South Africa. I go there from time to time. That is some of the most fertile land in South Africa. It's also one of the parts of the country that has very high rainfall. So there's very good rainfall, very good fertile land, and mostly, I would say, more than 80% of the agricultural land there just lies unused. There's absolutely nothing going on there. In the east of the country, in the province that is called KwaZulu-Natal, that is where the Zulu people live, about 20% of the whole South African agricultural land there belongs to the Zulu Kingdom. And most of that land is completely unused, So there's been absolutely no success in this idea of taking land from the white minority, give it to the black majority, and then you will just have one happy family, because that's this kind of idea that are that we're told, So you actually, the only thing that you do is you put food production under pressure. You put enormous pressure on the current farmers who need to produce enough food for a growing population. And we have the same issue that you have in many other parts of Africa, but also in other Western countries, is that you have an enormous a growth of the population, not only with immigration. Immigration is one of it. We have, as South Africa, as a country, we're having still until today very high illegal immigration. But you also have this enormous families, with people, the poorest of the poor people, having 6 or 7 children, and you have only 29,000 commercial farmers who need to feed all these people. So yeah, it's a crazy situation, and I think that is why it's so important that we have alternative media in America, in South Africa, everywhere, who goes out and tell the truth, tell the real story of what is happening.
Right.
And Jeremy, I think even if you accept all the left-wing narrative on apartheid as well, what they claim existed was a political and legal structure that disadvantaged and hurt, suppressed people.
Yeah.
That's all we have today. And one thing I haven't heard Jaco talk about yet, and I don't know if you can talk about it, but a lot of these farmer murders, they don't get prosecuted, right? And they
Not at all, yeah.
suspect it's because there's a wing of the ANC, the militant wing of the ANC, that is systemically going out and doing this. These are political acts. And that's one reason they're being tortured, so gruesomely, is because they're doing this because of politics, not because they're high, or the reasons we have crime in America. These are political things that are being done by the government and by the government's people. And in the meantime, the Afrikaners are being hurt, and there's a huge portion of our own country that won't even accept a few dozen of them as refugees.
and because they're not being prosecuted at all, no charges. They're, whether the government's literally sponsoring, which I agree with you, I think they are, and we'll ask Jaco to chime in on that. But I think that because they're not, at the least, not prosecuted for this, that makes them that much more emboldened to go do this. We know that there is a wickedness within the hearts of men that, if it's not restrained by law and by somebody with a bigger stick, that a just person with a bigger stick, that lawlessness will reign. I have never seen, and I know there's been atrocities throughout mankind's history, but to see the amount of bold atrocities of just these brutal rapes and murders, I'll hear a story of some illegal that just went up and killed a woman, just stabbed her 40 times. And you're listening to the whole story and you're almost going, is there a rape? Was there, you almost, to be morbid about it, you almost want there to be a rape, to be some type of motive. You're telling me you just went up and stabbed this woman to death? You didn't even try to, whatever your twisted sexual thing is, you just murdered her straight up. And some of the stories that I've heard, and Jaco, if you want to share any of them, we don't want to obviously glorify any of that, but we do want to make people aware of that. I know of the one woman, she was tied and tortured, and then her husband was murdered in front of her. And I think her arm was cut off. I'm probably not getting the full story. Is that correct, Jaco?
Yes, I mean, that's one of the examples.
Okay.
I'm very happy that you refer to the issue of prosecution, because in the case of farm murders in South Africa, only 9% of the killers were ever successfully prosecuted. So 91% were never successfully prosecuted until today.
Wow.
Now, in more than 90% of cases of farm attacks, you have this brutal torture. They usually use boiling water. They pour boiling water over young children. They bind the young children, and the fathers and mothers need to look while they pour boiling water over the children. They use clothing irons that you use to iron your clothing, and they burn old ladies' bodies for 6 to 8 hours until they die of the pain. The amount of torture that happens on South African farms every second or third day is a reality. It's been our reality for 3 decades, and the mainstream media were never once willing to talk about that. I've had meetings with everyone from the Wall Street Journal to whoever else, they were never willing to report about this, to write about this. There's all the evidence, I've got the pictures, the photos on my cell phone that I can send to people. Dossiers and dossiers of pictures of what people look like after they were tortured to death on South African farms. That's been our reality.
Wow.
The trauma, you can think of the trauma of the people who do survive this, and sometimes they are survivors.
Yeah.
There's sometimes women who survive an attack where the husbands were killed on the farms. There's children sometimes surviving this. The trauma in my community, amongst my people, is immense, and then we are told we are racists, we are land thieves, and we must go. That's what we are told by the political leaders of South Africa every single day.
That's just to me, that is just the height of demonic depravity, and I don't know how you can have a soul that is redeemable. I mean, I know Christ died for everybody, but man, you get to a certain point where you're doing those types of things. How do you have a soul that is even redeemable at that point? I think, going Old Testament wise, I think that's why the Lord instructed Israel at certain points just to wipe entire populations of their enemies out, because they were so far gone. And I don't believe in a genocide of a whole race, but certainly these roving bands that are going through, that are doing this, that leads me to another question here. What is your self-defense there? We have the Second Amendment here that's constantly under assault from the left. What do you guys, are you allowed to defend yourself? I mean, obviously these bands are coming in big numbers in order to take over, but give us that dynamic of the self-defense aspects that are there.
Yes, a very important point. I think our right to bear arms are extremely under attack in South Africa, much the same as in the US, but it's already much further down the road. And that is why it's so important that you must never stop that fight. I mean, you may be in a good period at the moment with the president in the White House who support that, but it may be different in future. We had during apartheid until 1994 quite free rights to bear arms, to have our own arms. And South Africa were a very safe country. There were not much crime, not much violence. That changed during the 1990s when people were forced to hand in their firearms to the South African police. It became very difficult to get a license to own a firearm. You need to be licensed. You need to go for constant exams and testing to have the right to own a firearm. What we are doing as an organization, my organization, we are training people. We have firearm training every weekend. We have support structures. Like it's the middle of the night now while I'm talking to you here in South Africa. And while I'm talking to you, we have groups of people in more than 400 communities driving around, flying drones, and trying to protect our communities. We have our own support structures. These are people who are highly trained. We train them from our own money, from donations in communities around South Africa to try and find these people, these perpetrators. But it's difficult. It's a large country. In some instances, people live very isolated, especially on farms. It's very long distances. You may in some instances have 20 miles or 30 miles between farms. It's huge, very dry land farms. And we have people who drive through night, to try and protect these people, because most of these attacks happen during the night. It happened in the early morning hours at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning. Right. So we try our best, to give you an example of what happened in the last 2 years. And last year, there were an increase in farm attacks, but there were actually less farmers killed. And the reason for that is that farmers are in a better position to protect themselves. So we help farmers to get the necessary training, to get the licenses to own their own firearm so that they can fight back. But yes, I mean, there's farmers on some farms who are 80 years old, 85 years old. It's not always that easy to protect yourself, but it's really necessary, and it becomes more and more important.
Yeah. And that's a dynamic, because they're not coming unarmed. They're coming to take you guys out, and that's I really think our founding fathers understood that more than anybody previous to that is the right to self-defense. And I think about the one of the aspects that we don't even talk about is the other thing. You've got lions and all sorts. I mean, how many encounters have you had with the wildlife there? Let alone, I mean, it's not just being able to shoot some deer, or what do you got? Antelope over there? What do you got? Anyway, yes. Being able to harvest some of the wild population, but then to protect yourself. I heard a story just recently that the farmers, not only are they under assault by these roving gangs and have fear of that, but they got if a lion shows up at your house, you may be stuck there for a while.
Yes, I must make you jealous, maybe, but I have two friends from Michigan who will arrive here within a day or two, and I'm taking them on a hunting trip within the next few days,
Oh, nice.
So, yes. So we like to hunt, it's a wild country. South Africa has always been a very wild country. There's dangerous animals in South Africa. That's a reality. I think that's part of the survival skills that my people have. When we moved inland, so the first people arrived from Europe around Cape Town, right on the coast. And when our people moved inland, they came across these wild animals. There's a great story of a young boy of 10 who had to go in front of the group of farmers who moved in, and he was on horseback with a gun, 10 years old, on his horse, and he encountered a group of 150 lions.
Wow.
And he somehow survived that. We don't know how he survived that, but he survived that, and he was able to tell that story to his parents. I mean, that's 250 years ago that happened, So
wow.
My people have survival skills. I think that's very important. Afrikaners are very adaptive. They know how to protect themselves. They are fighters. We love our land, So for some people, it's an option to go to America, to work there on farms. They are contributing very well. I'm proud of my people. I must tell you one short story. I was driving last year through the US. I came from Michigan. I went to Wisconsin, and then I had to drive all the way to Texas. And I stopped in Oklahoma, small town in Oklahoma, to get something to drink and to fill up the car, my rental car. And there was an old lady, American lady, working there, asking me, what accent do you speak? That's not Australian, she said. I said, no, it's South African. And she said, oh, well, there's a young guy working here on a farm just a few miles from here. And he's the nicest chap I've ever met. When he comes in here, he takes off his hat. He always asks, how are you, ma'am? And the farmer says that he can't go on with his farm without this young farmer from South Africa. So we're very proud of our young people and how they're already contributing in America. But we love our land. We can't all just pick up and pack up and move to America. We need to survive here in South Africa, and we need to find ways to survive here.
Yeah, and it doesn't go beyond what you said. How many people just were here? What was the number? The amount of people that just came, the real small number.
No, it was 59.
59. But they're waving American flags. They know they didn't want to leave, but they're coming and they're going, well, if this is where we got to go, then we're going to assimilate and we're going to honor the country. And like you said earlier in the show, that's a contrast between these other groups of people that have illegally entered this country, or maybe came here with nefarious motives, and they're waving flags of this. You know what? If you don't want to come here and assimilate, just like you said, you don't know German or Dutch. Well, maybe you know some Dutch. I don't know. But you said you didn't know German. I don't know any Polish. I don't know any Czechoslovakian. I don't know any French. And that, those are my heritage back there. And my family came here in the 1880s. So I mean, it's these dynamics of you assimilate, you learn. Are you curious of your ancestry? Do you celebrate your history? Absolutely. But you coming to a land and you honor it. Any thoughts, Ben, on talking about the self-defense dynamics or any of that?
Jeremy, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, thank God we have the Second Amendment here in America, but certainly the South Africans have a hard road in front of them. I mean, they're resilient people, but it's awful what they're going through. And hopefully, America can be a little more receptive to the people who are so scared for their life they want to leave.
Right.
But also, hopefully, they continue to be resilient and stand up for the hundreds of years they've lived there. So
yeah,
God bless them.
Well, it makes me think of Braveheart when he says, I've seen a soldier. A non-conscripted, but an actual soldier standing over his wounded horse to defend it because it's his horse and it's his land versus, he was describing how these people are going to turn and run. These soldiers are going to turn and run because they're just hired. He said, but people who actually own the land, who are fighting for the land, they're going to stand up and do that. I love the fact that you guys are doing, the self-defense trainings and getting people equipped and getting them licensed. You're still trying to work as best you can within the system, but if they're requiring a license, all right, then we're gonna get in here and kick ass and make sure that we get as many people licensed as possible. Do you have any outside backing for this? Is it all community based, or have you had some other people in America that really step up? Give me a little bit of the backstory on that.
Yeah, not yet. We're trying with that, and I think that's part of my whole campaign. And one of the reasons that I visit America regularly, we need to get more Americans to know of what's happening in South Africa, to get more support, because at the moment we finance all of this by ourselves, so we fundraise, we have members, we're a members organization. People join our organization, and it's especially important for me to also support the small farmers. There's many Afrikaners who are small farmers. They're not wealthy. They can't afford all the technology for self-defense, to buy weapons, to put up cameras again around their houses, to use things like drones to fly over their farms to look at these perpetrators. So we have an enormous campaign. We are spending millions of dollars every year on these projects, and that's why it's important for people to take notice. I think there was too long a time in America, especially, where people didn't really take notice of what was happening in South Africa, and that was simply because of the position of the mainstream media. The old mainstream media dominated our thinking. It dominated people's information flow. That has changed. We now have all the alternative media. I've been on so many American alternative media and new media over the last few weeks, and it's clear for me now that people are taking notice. It's so much different from what it was a few years ago. When I visited America 10 or 20 years ago, very few people knew much about South Africa. They thought that whites in South Africa were these terrible racists who hated black people and who just wanted to suppress black people. Now people see South Africa is much more complex, and what happened in South Africa may be, it may tell a story for not only America, but many European countries also, of what the future may look like.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about the communism dynamic, and started off with this question. Do you think it's the communist influence and overtone, or the fact that they didn't earn it, that most of these tribes, most of these people that are given the land, just cannot succeed to save their own lives, quite literally? Do you think it's the communism, or the fact that they didn't have to fight and earn it, or a combination? Or is there another dynamic to add into that mix of why, if you inherit something? We see this here in America with wealthy families, that their kids, they're not forced to earn into to that wealth, and they're just given that wealth, and they either, in the rare occurrences, take it to the next level and become even better. But in most occurrences, they either squander it or self-destruct, because they never earned it. And so I'm just curious about that, knowing that the huge communist influence there, but also what your perspective that you're seeing, what do you think's really behind their inability to save their own lives?
Yes, there's a few things. I think you've mentioned the one, and that was very clear in South Africa when the ANC took over South Africa in 1994. They took control of a country with great infrastructure, with great roads, a successful railway, good harbors, strong economy, not much government debt. Everything was working in South Africa, and they didn't maintain it. They just didn't look after it. They destroyed it. There's also a problem in Africa in general of entitlement. People who think, and you find that in many African countries, that many Africans will say that they are entitled to some kind of restitution. Yep. You need to pay some form of restitution because of colonialism and because of slavery and all of that, and you find the same in South Africa, that kind of entitlement. When you go to Africa, and I've been to many African countries, there's places in Africa where people moved beyond that entitlement, and there it's actually going very well. We have a neighboring country like that, Botswana. Botswana is probably one of the most successful African countries, but their leaders just decided to move beyond entitlement, and they don't talk about slavery. They don't talk about colonialism. Yeah. They focus on infrastructure, on education, on ensuring that people have opportunities, and it's actually very going well in Botswana, and Botswana also has very good trade with America. And that's a small country. It's one of the smallest countries in Africa. Mm-hmm. Then there's another thing, and I mean, you've mentioned that, and that is very important, and that is the influence of communism. Remember that all the leaders of the African National Congress, of the ANC, were trained in the Soviet Union. They had their training in the Soviet Union. They have kind of communist thinking. They talk about comrades. That's a term that's used in South Africa every day. The politicians refer to each other as comrades, and it's all about central control, centralized control.
Right.
Now, let's be honest, you had something like that in America.
Yeah.
The enormous power of the federal government, in America, that's a form of centralized government, to take control of education. In the American system, there's no reason that you need to have a federal Department of Education when you
Right.
have states who can look after education. That's the same in South Africa. The ANC centralized everything. They took water rights, mineral rights, they centralized all of that. And now recently they centralized education. So education are now completely centralized in South Africa. And what is the reason? When you centralize education, you can dominate the thinking of a people in the future. You can indoctrinate children. You can control the minds of the next generation. And that is what we have in South Africa. And you need to fight against that in America. We are fighting against that here. We are working on creating private schools, our own education systems, because we can't let the government control the thinking of our children in future. So yes, there's a strong communist view around a centralized government and controlling all the levers of power in a country. And I mean, it's playing out in South Africa. It's a very good example of what is possible.
Yeah, well, and talking about the communism dynamic, one of the planks of that we know of the Communist Manifesto is to have the control of the agricultural, and every time that they do that and implement control of the agriculture in a country, it's destroyed within a generation, and the people are starving to death. I mean, Mao's great leap forward was several million people that they would boil. They would have the human pots, that the big boiling pots, and they would just throw the people in there and cook them up and eat them. And I'm like, what? That's the craziness of this. What do you got going over there, Ben? I know you've been taking some notes. You got a question you want to lead us into before I get into some of the news articles?
No, I just think that it's interesting. I think exactly what you said about the centralization of power, but it's also this combination of political correctness and being hostile to free speech, where they create these problems and then we can't honestly talk about these problems.
Correct.
And it's like those things combined, it's all of a sudden, that's the perfect storm of these things never stopping.
Well, we had this idiot from our country, John Kerry, come out there and say, well, the problem with the food production is we need to cut back on the farms. What? Yeah. Your solution to food shortage is to cut back on farms? Are you an idiot? And of course, he's an elite globalist piece of trash. So we'll leave it there. I'm going to look at some of these articles over here, Jaco, and one of them that, and I want to give a shout out to Shane Trejos, who helped set this up tonight and wasn't able to make it out for the show. But Shane's brought a lot of great guests, and you are awesome tonight, and I appreciate your time. I know it's late there in South Africa. This is an article, and I'm going to throw it up for our people watching here. I got to do this. I got to remember my buttons. We've been talking so much and enjoying the conversation. I gotta hit my buttons, and there it is. So looking at this, it says the road to Trump's embrace of white South Africans. The Trump administration's hostile approach to South Africa was shaped by a convergence of factors. It was May 2019, and national security officials were in a situation room discussing Iran when President Trump abruptly changed the subject. He wanted to talk about granting asylum and citizenship to white South African farmers. Mr. Trump had floated the idea before, claiming that farmers were a persecuted minority group being displaced from their own land, according to John R. Bolton, his national security advisor at the time. And we've talked about Bolton, Mr. Mustache there. Bolton said that he thought little of Trump's wish. Of course he did, because he's a warmonger. And the president had embraced fringe ideas and false narratives pushed by white Afrikaner activists, said Mr. Bolton. Quote, it never amounted to anything, so I just put it up as typical Trump, Bolton recalled later in a recent interview. Some random person tells him something and he's obsessed with it. Years later, Trump's view on white farmers in South Africa are shaped are shaping U.S. foreign policy in his second term. On Monday, the first group of Afrikaners, a white ethnic minority that ruled during the apartheid in South Africa, landed in Washington as the Trump administration upended the refugee system that had provided sanctuary for those fleeing war, famine, and natural disaster. The administration is welcoming white South Africans after suspending the program for everyone else, including other Africans who have waited in refugee camps for years and years and years. Well, there's an actual crisis going on versus people that have been in refugee camps for years. If you're in a refugee camp, I mean that's a better step than waiting for somebody to come down the road with machetes and machine guns and taking you and putting, as you said, clothing irons and boiling water on your children. Any thoughts on that? I know we went over a bunch of this stuff, but I wanted to cover a couple of these articles that Shane sent us just to maybe if there's any nuances here that you wanted to. You mentioned Bolton already, obviously, Mr. Mustache, and I do like Trump's bit of revisionism, I would say. I don't think he's not trying to spin it, but he's got a little bit of revisionism. He's like, yeah, Bolton was a piece of shit, but you know what? When I walked into a room, everybody was afraid because they knew he was a warmonger and he was gonna, had a itchy trigger finger.
Well, and I think Bolton wasn't just a warmonger; he was an open borders warmonger too. And so, people could come from anywhere in the world, show up to America, and say that they were an economic refugee or that they were being persecuted without any proof.
Yeah.
And yet here we have proof, and we've had proof for the last 6 years. Even longer, of the persecution of the Afrikaners, and John Bolton thinks they should just die.
Of course, it's expedient. Thoughts on that, Jaco, on this article in particular?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's why the left is going crazy. I'm being called by the New York Times and these papers all of the time. They've also quoted me in one of those articles, but. The interesting thing is, you must just ask if you look at Palestinians and Palestinian people want to flee the Palestinian areas like Gaza and the West Bank. Why don't Qatar or Jordan or Saudi Arabia or any of these countries take in those people? The Arabs, their family, why are Turkey and Erdogan in Turkey so unhappy with all the Syrians there, and he just want to send them all back to Syria? We as Afrikaners and those people who are the worst persecuted amongst Afrikaners have absolutely nowhere to go. There's no camp that people can go to. There's no country of descent. There's no family country. We can't go to the Netherlands. They don't want us. We can't go to Germany because they're all taking in these people from the Middle East who are destroying their cities like Brussels and Paris and all these places that I've been recently to Europe. I can tell you it's a complete mess. Europe, large parts of Europe are gone. We've lost many parts of Europe. So in that sense, I think what President Trump did were moral. It was the right thing to do. He had absolutely made the correct moral decision. And I think it was simply based on that. He understood what happened in South Africa and that we as Afrikaners have no other place to go. We don't have some kind of neighboring country or place that will take in persecuted Afrikaners.
Absolutely. And that's a huge dynamic. I want to jump to this one next. This is the EFF. Tell me what that.
Yes.
You know what that is?
Economic freedom fighters. So
and
whatever economic freedom means.
And so their quote here is, "We will continue chanting, kill the Boer, kill the farmer until they turn blue and green." Do you know what that phraseology means, to turn blue and green? Or is that just?
Yes, that's actually referring to death. That is the way that they will refer to someone dying.
Oh,
when you torture someone, that's when you torture someone to death.
And they turn blue or green. That's their dynamic of it.
Yes.
Okay. So they're the economic. I guess I should have scrolled down. I would have seen the EFF listed out. Insists it will not back down from singing the controversial song with lyrics "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," despite increasing calls for the song to be shunned in the public discourse. So, as you said, I think we pointed it out just a little bit, but as you said, that Europe is completely destroyed, and I think of this dynamic of you said it, that replacement populations and stuff like that. There's whole cities and towns throughout Europe. I think it's Ireland, where they had a town of, I don't know, 40,000 people, and they brought in 200,000 refugees or something like that. That you just literally changed the entire population of that town. You changed the dynamics of that town. They're not coming in to learn what those indigenous people are doing. They're coming in with their own sets of values, however twisted they may be, and they're just taking over. And now you've got throughout all of Europe roving rape gangs that are just murdering and raping at will. And there's somebody I follow on X. The name's escaping me because the name, it denotes what they cover, and they literally are. It's daily, if not multiple times a day. It'll say, "Meet Sarah." Sarah was 24. Sarah was walking down the road. She was going to her gym, and a group of 20 migrants came up and attacked her and gang raped her to death, and left her for dead after they raped her, stabbed her, left her for dead. She was 24. And this is daily that they're posting this and saying somebody's got to do something about it. And I think that what Trump has stepped up and doing, but I want to hear just a little bit more on this, either from you, Ben, or from Jaco on this, that they're not just coming to these countries and coming into these areas. And obviously in South Africa, it's not just the blacks coming into the farm areas and saying, we don't like you, we don't want you here. They're literally coming in and murdering and torturing and raping. And it breaks my heart in one area, and it makes me want to grab the shotgun off the wall on another area and just say, come on, we gotta, and what's common in all of those areas, really, blue cities here in America, Europe, the government there in South Africa trying to disarm everybody. It's literally, you're powerless to defend yourself, and these roving gangs are coming in. They're not going to obey the law. They're going to get weapons however they will. Thoughts on this, guys?
Yes, they just smuggle it over the border. They walk across the border with all these weapons from war zones, because in Africa there are so many war zones. If you look at our biggest city in South Africa, Johannesburg, that's the biggest city. It's a city of 5-6 million people. 45% of all children born in Johannesburg last year were the children of illegal migrants. So you're close to 50% of all children born from illegal migrants. That's the story of what happened. But you will never read that in the mainstream media. I mean, CNN will not come to South Africa to do a story about that. They will come to South Africa to try and find white racists. I mean, they've been going around with media teams, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, all of them. They've been very busy here in South Africa the last few weeks, and they're just trying to find white racists. They're trying to find someone that will be racist on a television camera. They will not tell the true stories. That's the same in Europe. I'm so happy you refer to that, because I've been for 3 weeks now in Europe. It's a terribly sad thing that's happening to Europe. We are losing, I'm always saying we're losing the mother continent, where we all came from. In Germany, there's these rapes of school girls every day.
Yeah.
None of the mainstream media report on it. You will never read in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, the big newspapers. None of these newspapers will ever report on these rapes and murders. The television in Germany will never report on that. And that is why the alternative media becomes so important, to get this message out. I was in a small town in the Netherlands last week, in the rural parts of the northeast of the Netherlands, a small town called Ter Apel, a town of 400 people. They created a refugee center there with 1,600 people from Afghanistan. You can just think what that town looks like now. The 400 Dutch people need to live in a town that's suddenly overrun by these Middle Eastern young men, and it's only young men. Let's be honest about that.
Right.
It's not women. It's not women and children
No.
fleeing war. It's young men. They're opportunistic. They're looking for handouts. They are raping young girls on the street. That are the people that Europe took in over the last few years, and you're paying or they are paying a very, very high price for that. And that is why I'm just happy that at least for now it stopped in America.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's the next one that's dealing with this rape dynamic, and Ben, feel free to chime in once I go to this one if you. This is from the Citizen. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes.
Okay. And so this is South African crime. The crime stats: murder and rape cases went up in the last 3 months of 2022. I don't know if this is going back to 2022 just because that's probably the last time they compiled numbers. I don't know if there's updated numbers, but let me read just a little bit here. On Friday morning, management of the South African Police Service, led by the police minister, I can't say that name, not because I just can't pronounce it, presented the quarterly crime statistics to the Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Police, covering the period between October 1st, 2022 and the 31st of December. So just like it says, just 3 months. And it said that that the figure shows that 7,555 people were murdered in the country during that quarter, representing an increase of 10% compared to the same period in 2021, where 6,859 people were murdered. What are you seeing there, Jaco, as far as these types of numbers? Obviously, the farmers are being attacked, but what are you seeing as far as crime statistics and things? Obviously, we're speaking not quite anecdotally. There's a lot of evidence. We could do just a real cursory research and pull up stuff on the Gateway Pundit or InfoWars or Natural News or any of the these really good news organizations that do their research, and we could find these statistics all over the places. Shane sent us this one from the Citizen. But what numbers are you seeing there in South Africa? And if you've got other sources of numbers, please chime in. But go ahead, Jaco, to start out with the numbers here.
Yes, I mean, if you look at that numbers, it's a war zone. We have some of the highest murder rates, rapes, violent crimes, break-ins in people's houses, some of the highest in the world. So it's really a war zone. It's increasing every single year. The police force are losing control. The South African police are completely losing control. Sometimes they are even themselves involved in crimes. There were farm attacks where the local police, were involved in farm attacks. So yes, when you look at safety in South Africa, people need to take control of their own safety. You need to have good self-defense. We have a huge private security sector. More than 1 million people in South Africa works in private security. So you will have some very safe neighborhoods around our cities. But the reason for that is that there's big walls again around those neighborhoods and private security, private safety, patrolling those communities. That's the only way that you can stay safe in South Africa. For the rest out there, it's a war zone. It's a constant war zone. I mean, there's many black people, and I feel just as sorry for them. So many innocent black people getting killed every single day in some areas, and then in many instances by all these illegal immigrants, who comes from African countries where there's war, people from Nigeria, from Somalia, from Mozambique, all these people coming in with all the weapons and also murdering and raping black women, So it's a war zone out there. And that just shows you what is possible if you don't have borders, if you have uncontrolled illegal immigration, if you make it difficult for the local population to protect themselves. Again, South Africa, a very good example of what can happen in other Western countries in future.
Yeah. Ben, any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think a lot of that speaks for itself. One thing I found while we were talking is a story from the New York Times saying that Kill the Boer, the song, should not be taken literally.
Oh.
And the citation they use is an authority from the EFF.
Okay.
And they say, well, the EFF says, hey, don't take it literally. Even though we're singing kill the boar,
Yeah.
and we're clearly killing the boars.
Right.
That's not what it means.
It's not what it means.
Right.
You're taking it out of context.
Right.
Yeah. Why, come on. That's just hyperbole. It's just, we mean kill them with kindness.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what we literally mean. I meant to ask you a little bit earlier when we were talking about some of this, kill the boar, kill the farmer. Have you personally had any experiences with hostility on your farm area there, Jaco? Obviously you're sitting here, so you haven't been killed, but have you encountered some hostility coming directly at your door, or is it just neighbors up to this point? Because you're the one organizing the guns, so I think, or helping people defend themselves. So, any thoughts on that?
No, nothing on our farm, and for the reason our farm is right in the south of South Africa, on the south coast of South Africa.
Okay.
And that's one part where there's not yet many farm murders. The farm murders take place in the central and northern parts of South Africa mostly. So our part of the country is still safer, but it's already changing. My mother lives alone on the farm at the moment. My father is deceased, and my mother is alone on the farm. We're still going on with the dairy farm, and it becomes more difficult. But I know many people who were affected by farm attacks and by very brutal attacks. I must say again, we all know what to do. Myself, we are very vigilant. We know what to do. We don't drive around at night. We know what to look out for. I think our self-defense have certainly improved over the last few years, but that doesn't mean that the dangers are not out there. It's happening. It's happening every day. These things, in a week's time, I can send you the two or three farm attacks that happened, and it's usually older people that are targeted, right? People in their 70s and their 80s living alone on farms. Those are the people who find it the most difficult, to defend themselves.
Yeah, they're preying upon them, and so that makes sense. That you're in a little, a more remote coastal geographical area, and the ones that are more inland, and more adjacent, and the opportunities are there for these people to come in and attack, and obviously being older age people. We talked about the replacement population dynamic. How much are the Afrikaners? They seem to be a little bit weak on procreation there. I grew up on farms, and one of the things that farms did for a lot of years, for decades, if not centuries, was you had as many kids as you could because they had to work the farms. It seems with the example of a lot of older people on the farms being targeted and killed, that they're not doing enough replacement population of their own ancestors. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I think that's certainly a fair assessment. I think we as Afrikaners still have more children than, for example, the Europeans. When you go again to Europe and you look at the Germans and the Dutch and the French, the Italians, they don't have children anymore. So we still have families of 3 or 4 children, but I do think we don't have enough children. And we have more than one challenge. We have many of the young people going to the cities to work in cities like Pretoria, Cape Town, other cities, but we also have immigration. Many of our young people leave South Africa. So you have young Afrikaners today in America, in Canada, all over Europe, Australia, New Zealand. So that's a big problem. About 20% of Afrikaners have already left South Africa. And that's having a big influence, on our community. We're about 2.5 million people. And I think our decline at the moment have more to do with immigration, with young Afrikaners leaving the country, than necessarily with us not having enough children. But the problem on farms are certainly a fact. I think, and that's also a global problem, that many young people don't want to go back to the farms, don't want to always work on the farms. They go to university and then they stay in the cities. But there's still many young Afrikaner farmers. I think more than enough. Like I've said, there's thousands of them temporarily working on American farms. But if you go to rural towns, yes, there's still many young farmers also there, but yeah, not enough.
So it's lacking, but there are enough people. have in the past, I know right now it wouldn't be advantageous, but in the past, did some of the farmers hire some of the immigrants, legal immigrants, some of those type of people to come in and work the farms with them? Because if you're running a big farm, I know it takes a lot of hands make light work. So I mean, it's I'm just curious
Yeah.
about that dynamic. If if we're below in America, and a lot of first world nations are well below replacement population. If you're not having at least 2.1 to 2.5 kids per family, you're not replacing yourselves, let alone having 5, 6, 7, multiple kids. And so you're saying that there is a good supply of young people, but they're going to university, and then they're coming over temporarily to America and working other farms. Was there a time, or is there situations where some of these immigrants or some of these other workers are being hired from the farm? How's that work? What's that dynamic there?
Yes, very good point, and I think that's one of the challenges. So yes, you do have some of these immigrants working on farms, people from countries like Mozambique and Zimbabwe, and then sadly enough, they became part of the problem of crime. So
Right.
we had a huge problem because it's very, very large farms. You sometimes have older people on farms. They make use of these immigrant labor, and that is part of the mistake I think my people made, Afrikaners. We also tell that to our people, you must not do that. That's a big mistake. There's many examples of farm murders that were where some of these immigrants were involved with. So that's a challenge when you don't have enough children, and you don't have a culture always of people wanting to work the farms and understanding to do that. But I do think we're changing that. We're also using more mechanization on our farms. I think we were in a sense behind on that, but that's really improving very much over the last few years.
Yeah, I watched this. The side note, you said your family has a dairy farm. I watched just recently. There was I love how it's made. I kick that on the TV every once in a while still. But they had this whole dairy farm, and the dairy farm had it was almost completely automated. And the dairy cows would, when their udders got to a place where they were full and they knew they needed to be milked, they came in and they had a little tag, and the computer knew, and there was a whole washing system, washed the udder, washed all the teats, and then came in and had each one, and they would milk them until they were done, and then the cow would just gently walk away, and the next cow would come wandering up there and knew where to go. And there was they didn't milk them at a certain time every single day. When the cows felt like they needed to be milked, they came in, and I was like, wow, I never saw that from that. So there are really good ways that you automate, and you can be in harmony still with nature and with livestock and with everything like that. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Temple Grandin years ago. Temple Grandin was a highly functioning autistic girl out of I think Oklahoma, Texas area. And she envisioned a better way to do these huge industrial farms that was far more humane. And one of her phrases was, "Nature is cruel, we don't have to be." And so she developed pens and different ways of leading beef cattle into the slaughtering area that didn't cause them to produce stress hormones and go into a fight or flight mode, but cause them to relax and then to be gently euthanized at that point. I don't know if that's the right euthanized, killed, so that they could be slaughtered. But I think about these dynamics, and obviously, you try to compensate with a lack of children being there with mechanization, but it can only go so far, and especially when you have older populations. And it seems like you have you're letting a lot of time the foxes into the hen house when you're inviting these immigrants in, hoping that you would hope that they would come in, learn a skill, learn the trade, and benefit from that, and maybe start their own little homestead eventually, something like that. But instead, they become conniving and see an opportunity. Anyways.
Yes, absolutely. I think we've paid a very expensive price for that, and I think that's one of the lessons
Mhm.
of the last few decades. Is you need to be able to do your own work. I think when you use other people, immigrants, illegal immigrants, to do your work, then you will pay a price for that.
Yeah. What I'm pulling up a map real quick. I just wanted to see it. I obviously know where South Africa is, right down there. But I wanted to see. Is this going to give me? Okay, so there's Cape Town, Johannesburg. I'm gonna put this over on my screen. Obviously, you know where you live, Jaco. So
Yes.
I'm not necessarily sharing that with you. But where is Zimbabwe? You said that. Botswana. I see where Botswana is. So that's Botswana is completely landlocked directly above.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Completely landlocked, a very dry country, even drier than South Africa, but a very successful country. Very few crime.
Yeah.
A very stable government. People are quite happy in Botswana. Very good relations with Western countries like America and European countries.
Mhm.
And then you can just next door have Zimbabwe. Now, I don't know if you know what happened in Zimbabwe 25 years ago.
Okay.
They also had quite a large white population in Zimbabwe. All the farmers in Zimbabwe were also white farmers, and they expropriated all the farmland from Zimbabwe. And today people are starving to death in Zimbabwe.
Right.
People are really in Zimbabwe. People are fleeing the country. Many millions of them, about 6 million people from Zimbabwe, came to South Africa. So you can have two neighboring countries with two very, very different outcomes. You see that in Central America with Haiti, and I think it's a Dominican Republic on one island.
Oh yeah.
And on the one hand, you can have a good government, and it can go better. On the other hand, you can have absolute destruction, and that's the case with Botswana and Zimbabwe.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's no to look at Haiti and I'm drawing
Dominican Republic.
Dominican. I started to say Costa Rica. And I'm like, no. One is a tropical, gorgeous resort area and thriving country, and the other side, we used to have missionaries that would come to our church years ago, and they would talk about it. They would say that the children used to eat mud pies, literally make mud pies and eat them because there was no trees, there was no vegetation, there was nothing left. When a hurricane would come through, everybody, as soon as the hurricane passed, they would all scavenge from each other to try and rebuild something to live in. And it was just the worst conditions. In fact, the missionary said, as horrible as it is, as horrible as the sweatshops were in Haiti, at least people had a job. Once the good-meaning liberals came in there and got rid of the sweatshops down there, now nobody had a job, and it impoverished the country even worse. And they do that by design, and it's amazing to have that dichotomy of right next to each other. You can have prosperity, and it all comes down to the government. It comes down to and the will of the people to say, to either self-destruct or to stand up. Speaking of Zimbabwe, Shane again sent us these, and I wanted to go to this one. This is an article from the BBC, surprisingly. It says Zimbabwe to return land seized from foreign farmers. Zimbabwe has offered to return land to foreign nationals whose farms were seized under the controversial government program 2 decades ago, which you just referenced, Jaco. Thousands of white farmers were forced from their land, often violently, between 2000 and 2001. The seizures were meant to redress colonial era land grabs, but contributed to the country's economic decline and ruined relations with the West. A separate compensation scheme has been launched for local white farmers. This is another article as well that says Zimbabwe makes first compensation payments to white farmers over land seizures. So going back to what you said, Jaco, that they seized the land there in Zimbabwe and they literally impoverished themselves and destroyed themselves. Now they're recognizing this. They're at least, I would assume, kind of waking up. Are you getting any that information filtered to you on what? I'm reading the article, but you're there in South Africa, and this country is
Yes.
just north of you. Are Is this coming from the fact that they're starving to death and they go, we got to bring the white people back here and know how to farm? Is that
Absolutely. They're starving to death. There's no economy left. The government don't get any money anymore. The president, Emerson Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe, even engaged with us. So some of my colleagues met with him recently. And there's one reason Mnangagwa and his government in Zimbabwe want money back from Western countries. They want America to invest in Zimbabwe again. The American investors all left Zimbabwe 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They want the Europeans back in Zimbabwe, and now they want us to play along, So that's why they have this scheme of giving some money to some of the white farmers who lost their farms, but it's not much. It's really less than 5% of the value of those farms. And important, many of those people are already dead. Those farm seizures, those farm attacks happened 25 years ago. So in many instances, the farmers are already dead. You can't find them anymore. But if you look at South African corn exports, our export of maize or corn, we export most of our corn now these days to Zimbabwe, and people live off that. That's the only food that the vast majority of people in Zimbabwe have is South African exported corn, and the problem is they don't have money to pay for that. So I think they're trying to change.
Okay.
They see what went wrong. It's very clear what went wrong. But interesting enough is that the South African government don't understand that. They can't understand that what happened in Zimbabwe was a complete failure. If they will do the same in South Africa, it will be even worse, because South Africa is a much, much larger country, much larger economy, a much more important country in Africa than Zimbabwe.
Wow. Some of these numbers here, as you said, I think you said 5%. In this article, it's saying that it was a statement this week that it amounted to equivalent of 1% of the total compensation claim of 311 was maybe what's been dispersed already, and said that 740 farms have been approved for compensation, with 378 benefiting from the first batch of payments, but these payments are extremely low. So are you getting a sense that they're trying to get the farmers back, or are they trying to compensation's great, but as you said, most of the farmers, a lot of them have passed or have no desire to go back. So the compensation, to me, I don't know how that resonates with anybody, but the idea of can you entice anybody to come back and work these lands again, knowing that they were violently removed from it by the government, and now the government's in shambles. So, hey, please come back. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, white farmers were in Zimbabwe for very long. Also, it was also family farms, very successful farming industry. Interestingly enough, if you go back 30, 40 years, Zimbabwe was a bigger agricultural exporter than South Africa.
Wow.
Zimbabwe were called in the 1980s the breadbasket of Africa. So Zimbabwe had a very, very successful agricultural industry. Today, there's nothing left of that. It's really something to see. I don't know if there's some video material on that, but you must look that up. If you drive through Zimbabwe, you can drive for hundreds of miles just with absolutely nothing. It's old farms where there were very successful farms 25 years ago. And there's just nothing going on today there. It's just desolate, it's terrible. There's some farmers who want to return. Some of those white farmers went north. They went to Zambia, and they're actually today very successful farmers in Zambia. Some of them are in Botswana. So you have some of these very stable African countries who took in the white farmers, and it's especially Botswana, Zambia, and then Kenya, who took in many of these farmers. But also many of these white farmers went to Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And I don't think any of them will return to Zimbabwe soon.
Namibia, is there
Namibia is that's a very dry country on the west coast, mostly desert. There's also many Afrikaners living there. So the white minority in Namibia are Afrikaners and Germans, so old German descendants. But the farmers, most of the farmers in Namibia are also Afrikaners. Namibia is a little more stable. You don't have the kind of farmer tax in Namibia.
Mhm.
But yes, it's a country with a very small population, 2 million people, very dry, more desert-like climate, but also some very, very successful Afrikaner farmers there.
Okay. Malawi.
Malawi, a very poor country, lots of problems. Many illegal immigrants in South Africa comes from Malawi. Malawi and Tanzania, those two countries adjacent to each other, they
Okay.
have a population boom. So if you go to countries like Malawi and Tanzania, you see that there's an enormous population boom happening there,
Mhm.
but there's just no opportunities for people. So they create all these illegal immigrants. You know, they create this flow of illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
So yes, we have in South Africa many people from Malawi, but yes, it's a very, very poor country, one of the poorest countries in Africa.
It's got to be a very interesting thing to see these dynamics right at your front door. I mean, we don't have. I wouldn't say that we have these type of extremes to where you drive from one state to the next state and have just desolation in one state versus not a desolation, you know, in another state prospering. To look at the southern area of Africa specifically, to go north from there, Jaco, just to see how this country's prospering and this country's completely desolate in a desert, and then this country's got overpopulation, and so they're just flooding into other countries that have resources that are just, you know, holding on by a thread. And just to see that's got to be a I don't know if amazing is the right word, but awe, you know, to just see it. As you said, you've driven through there, and there's just, you know, is there even grass growing in those former farms in Zimbabwe? Is it or is it just desert? Because
Yeah, I mean, it was really a beautiful country. I mean, you can look up old pictures of Zimbabwe of 30 or 40 years ago. It's something to see.
Mhm.
Today, there's nothing left. I mean, the people are eating the last wild animals. They are eating elephants. They are killing
Yeah.
elephants and eating elephant meat. I mean, that sounds something that I will never eat, you know, but they eat any kind of animal that they can kill. They eat insects. They will kill small insects and eat insects, you know.
Wow.
There's, like you say, there's not grass left. They will cook grass in a pot to try and survive, you know. That's when you have a complete destruction of the agricultural sector, complete destruction of the economy. And when people have nothing left to eat, you know, they will eat whatever is left.
Yeah.
So they will cut down all the trees. That's one big problem in some of these poor African countries. They are destroying all the trees. To burn the wood, there's no electricity left. And then they will just start killing all the animals. Whatever there is to kill, they will kill that, and they will eat those animals. And yeah, I think Africa has some of the best examples of this complete destruction, and Zimbabwe is probably one of the best examples.
Yeah, and that's just again, it's an amazing thing to think about. That we witnessed a microcosm of this really south of us in uh, Venezuela just recently. I mean, they've got some of the highest uh, oil reserves as far as the square acreage of their land, the amount of oil underneath it. We have far more in America, and obviously the Middle East and some other places. But as far as their land mass equivalent of how much oil is underneath it, it's like the vast majority of the country has oil underneath the whole thing. And it's amazing. They went from that type of prosperity to cannibalism and emptying out the zoos and eating all the wild animals in just what was it, 2-3 years? They went downhill so quickly, and it's amazing to me to watch that type of just super dive into decadence. And I'm assuming, you know, there's obviously got to be cannibalism and a lot of other things going on throughout those countries as well in Africa, just because that's what you resort to. You resort to eating whatever's crawling around, and then eventually you prey on each other. And that's somewhat the only, what would you say, saving grace, redeemable. These types of countries and populations that do this to themselves, they end up taking themselves out. And that's sad. That's a sad commentary to look at, but it's like you're not going to perpetuate and prosper. We're talking to you, Jaco, with your family history of 400 plus years of working this land. You prospered. You've been there, taking care of it, and here's these groups of people that are collapsing within years, not even decades, within years, falling into this type of tyranny. Any other
Just on that point, Jeremy, like how quick the left can destroy an industry, a business. They can regulate away a family business, and yet I think as any conservative knows who's tried to build a business or worked in a family business, it takes generations to make something that really is sustainable and something you can really be proud of. And it's really sad to see what the South Africans are going through. And obviously, we care about the Boers being killed and the Afrikaners who are under threat, but this is obviously hurting that whole region of the world, and it's hurting
as exporters, as he said, that the Zimbabwe was the breadbasket of Africa. He said in like the 1980s, up until the 1980s,
right.
And then we're exporting out there. And
the other thing I think that bears mentioning is, this feels is different hemisphere. It's a world away. It kind of feels like a very foreign issue. But, I think a lot of these political movements, the ANC and what happened to Zimbabwe, was really caused by, leftists in America who empowered these people. They put sanctions on these countries and really didn't care what was going to happen. They gaslit and ignored all these crimes that have been happening since the 90s. And then they turn away, they want to turn away the refugees, when the people who are trying to escape the problems that they made. It's been 20 years, but here in Michigan, Robert Mugabe got honorary degrees from Michigan State.
Right.
He was championed as like a great leader of Africa. And this was a monster who was going to, kill and terrorize his own people and ends up with policies that starve his own country. So,
in complete contrast to a guy like Gaddafi, who started out as a military dictator who took over and then turned his country into one of the most prosperous, where you got a year off if you got married, you got free school. They had a beautiful infrastructure, roads and everything like that. And of course, our great government, Hillary Clinton, we saw, he died. Because why? Because he wanted to get off the petrodollar and he was being successful at it.
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. No, I think the leftists in America push and support these policies that end up destroying productive people across the world, and it's really sad to see what they've ended up with in South Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. Jaco, do you think that this policy is going to have any effect in the short term in Zimbabwe? Do you think it'll do anything in the short term to resuscitate that country, or is it are we throwing good money after bad and wishful thinking that the farmers would return? I mean, it would take a while to build the infrastructure, but do you think anything in the near term can happen to redeem that area?
Yes, I think you're right. It will take some time, we all know that you can give someone a piece of land, but a piece of land means nothing if you don't have the knowledge, the infrastructure, but also the capital. That is what agriculture is today. You can't just sit on a land. We're not the frontiers people of 200 or 300 years ago anymore. Agriculture today are a very capital infrastructure based industry, and it was all destroyed in Zimbabwe. All the infrastructure was sold off and destroyed. So those farms, there's not much left of those farms. So I'm very skeptical if it will change very soon. I think it will really take some time. But I do believe there's some people who will move back because simply they love their land, they love their farms. Maybe some of the younger farmers will move back to Zimbabwe. That will happen. But I think it will be difficult. And I think it will especially take some time for American investors to go back to Zimbabwe, because those those American industries and there were many, there were a few hundred American companies doing business in Zimbabwe. And I mean, they've lost everything, they've lost all their investments there. And to try and build that up, always with the risk that you can fall back again to the kind of things that happened 20 years ago, that risk will always be there. So I'm very skeptical if you can really change Zimbabwe very soon.
Yeah. Do you think that that move, it has any political ripple? I mean, obviously President Trump doing what he's doing, is sending a ripple effect across the world and is shedding a big light on what's going on there in South Africa. Do you think Zimbabwe, these articles, I mean, the two that I read one was from BBC and one was from the AP. Those aren't conservative outlets. But they're reporting on the fact that Zimbabwe is in such bad shape that they're turning back to saying, hey, I guess we got to start paying these guys and maybe try to get them to come back. Do you think that will have a near-term effect on what you're experiencing there in South Africa?
Yes, I do think so, and I do hope so. I was in Washington myself in February, and I've engaged with the White House and the State Department, and it's very clear that there are people in the Trump administration that are very serious. They are focused, they are well informed. I must tell you, much better informed than previous administrations in Washington. They are very, very well informed about what's happening in South Africa. In terms of all the racial discrimination against whites, the things happening on farms, but also well aware of what's happening in the rest of Africa. So I think we have a great opportunity now. There's a window of opportunity during this Trump administration to change things, to keep on the pressure on the South African government, and hopefully we will see change. America is still the most powerful country in the world. America is still the most influential country in the world. President Trump is still the most powerful man in the world, I believe. And I think if the Americans keep on doing this, we can have policy changes in South Africa.
That's how hopeful are you in general on this? Just optimistic. I don't know if you're
Yes.
a man of faith.
Yes, I am.
What
Absolutely. I also believe in a calling, and I do believe that we as Afrikaners have a calling here in Africa. There's a reason for us to be here. I do believe that there will be a future here. And I do believe that President Trump is part of the bigger picture, that he plays a very, very important role now to change things. There's no reason for him to do that. South Africa is not that important to America. American trade with South Africa is not that big. There's much bigger other issues that President Trump must focus on. The war in Ukraine, the issues in the Middle East. There's so many other issues. The fact that President Trump came forward, put so much of his own political capital out there to support us as Afrikaners, that tells me that there's something really important happening here. So yes, I'm very much hopeful that with the Trump administration at our back, we can change things in South Africa. I'm really hopeful that there will be more to come, from the Trump administration, from America in general.
That's an amazing dynamic to think about. That as you said, and I want, being in the political sphere, Ben, you to speak to this too, that Trump's he's spending some of his political capital, but I don't think he sees it that way. We term it that way, correctly so, but I think he sees it as this is the right thing to do. This is a guy that you hear report after report after report where he just stops people randomly. I liken him to Nixon in that area, where Nixon would sneak out of the White House and just go walk. However he did that, and he would meet up with people and ask them about the Vietnam War and ask them about the economy and ask them about this stuff, and of course, they took him down with Watergate, but he was the most popularly elected president in what the modern times.
Right.
But I think of Donald Trump, he stops people and he asks them what they think about, just random people. He'll stop them and ask them, and he pays attention. And so when he goes after something, and as the one article we read that Trump, Bolton was concerned because Trump would get obsessed and singularly focused. That's because he's a man who actually cares and doesn't worry about his political capital, even though that's what we see him spending. He doesn't think of it that way. He thinks of this is the right thing to do, and I'm in a position to do it, so I'm going to do it. And I think about that political aspect and how what Trump's doing. He doesn't really. He has to be calculating. You always have to be, and he's got a huge ego. But this is a man who said that's wrong, and I'm going to extend it. We don't have this huge trade going on. We don't have these other alliances going on, but these people need help.
I think Trump's this, once in a lifetime kind of leader who I think you're absolutely right. I think the reason people love him so much is even though he's a billionaire, even though he's maybe not the most religious guy in the world, even though he's had a few marriages, right?
Right.
He clearly cares about the common man in America, and he's doing things and risking political capital to try and help them.
Right.
And I think the same thing's true here, where he sees these people, there's no benefit to him, right? I mean, this is not self-interest. This is wrong, and somebody needs to stand up for it.
Yeah.
I do think there's an element of politics, though, that, Trump is I think, a great man, but he's also obviously very shrewd.
Very calculating.
Right? Very calculating.
Yeah.
And I think this really helps illustrate in American politics how dishonest the left is when it talks about immigration and refugees.
Correct. I agree with you.
It just instantly you can see how evil the left is, where they would send these people back with a target on their back and say,
good luck.
You deserve it.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Not even just good luck. You deserve it.
Right.
No, and I agree with you. That's the dynamic of the political. What I look at Trump is he's politically astute and politically aware, but he doesn't do things from political motivation.
Right.
And I think that's the huge difference. He looked at what's going on there with the Afrikaners, and he said, "You know what? I'm gonna spend some of my political capital because this is the right thing to do." And I think that's the difference. Is he's not willing. He's willing to risk a political position because it's the right thing to do, versus these other people that are so calculated, like the left
and John Bolton,
who are over here just willing to let them die.
Right.
And we can look back so many different dynamics in history. I know it's late there, Jaco. I was scrolling through just to make sure there wasn't anything new that popped up over here on InfoWars. I will start the show sometimes, and by the time, or not even start the show, I'll do show prep, and 2 hours later, by the time I come upstairs, I have a hard time finding an article that I was using downstairs on my laptop, and I have to start sending it to the link to myself now, because by the time I get up here, so much news is hit that I have to go through and double check. So I was just double checking on InfoWars to see if there was anything new. I don't know if there's anything new on Gateway Pundit, but I didn't want to miss anything. Obviously the 59, I think we said, or 57,
59, I think.
59 Afrikaners that have come. I didn't know if there was anything new that had popped up in today or even yesterday that we missed. Jaco, what do you think of this James Comey, former FBI guy, finding rocks on the beach in the sequence of 8647? What do you think of that guy?
No, I don't. I don't know what to think of that. I mean, just on the thing of the media, there's so low trust in the media. That's the point here, maybe on all of these issues. This in the last 2 days in the South African media, the mainstream media, the left-wing media, all these articles, all these efforts to try to discredit these 59 refugees, Afrikaners who went to America. There's article after article. The one haven't paid taxes, he didn't pay all his taxes, and now he's fleeing to America. All these hit pieces in the media, and I think that's part of the problem. We need to break through all of that.
Absolutely, and I bring that up just because of the love that many foreign countries, obviously yourself and the Afrikaners there included, have for President Trump and they see the strength and honor and what he's trying to accomplish to not just restore. I mean, he wants to make America great again, but when we make America great again, that means that the rest of the world can benefit from that. And again, a rising tide raises all ships. And so you see our left-wing media here and in your own country that twist these things. And I mean, our own governor here in Michigan, there's a picture of her, I think it was last year, that had she had the same thing, an 8647 behind her on the shelf, kind of just hidden, but obvious there. And you zoom in it, and it was, as soon as this 8647 of Comey came up, they had this thing going on. And I look at it and I go, here's a guy that will disregard his political position or the advantage that it may or may not give to America to bring over people from a country that that are being brutally slaughtered, attacked. He will do that. And I go, and you want to kill that type of guy? It's like the mindset. I don't even want to try to think like these people, because their mindset is so warped and destructive and demonic. It just amazes me. We talked about a little bit about being a man of faith, and I wanted to know what's the flavor there, Jaco, just before we wrap up tonight, and I let you go and get some sleep. What's the flavor there spiritually with the farmers there? Obviously, you're talking, you're taking them through programs to be self-armed. I know in my own life, when I walk my land, I thank the Lord for it. I speak over my land, and anytime I have a thought or an inclination of harm. There's been a couple storms came through, and myself and my buddy Dean, we both were speaking. There was a big, huge storm that came through, and both of us, woke up by the thunder, and we're speaking over the storm system to pass over and speaking protection over our land. I'm just curious what type of dynamics spiritually and as you said, a calling and a destiny there in Africa. What type of aspects are you seeing, or do you implement yourself speaking over the land, the other people? Do they recognize that divine providence of having their land, and having the Lord, being partnered with the Lord to protect it? I'm just curious on that before we wrap up tonight.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's absolutely the case. Afrikaners are very conservative, religious people. We're Calvinists, mostly from the old Dutch Reformed churches, and we're all church-going people. I'm serving as an elder in my own church, and we have in our churches constant prayer meetings for the farmers to address these issues. We don't lose our faith. I think that's very important. That's in a sense also different from what happened in Europe over the last few decades. Afrikaners are still God-fearing people, and we believe that at the end of the day we will survive, but we will not survive without God on our side. And I think that's really what pulls us through. People sometimes ask, but why are you staying? Why are you staying in South Africa? You can live anywhere else. You can go to Australia or wherever else, and that is why, because we believe in our calling, and we do believe in a future. We're certain of a future for our people here in South Africa.
Amen. Well, we know that the first literal job given to a man was to work the ground, was to be planted in the garden and work the ground. So it's in the DNA of all of us, but it gets suppressed, and obviously demonic activity takes over whole swaths of the population and destroys their purpose within the earth that God created them for. Jaco, I want to give you just final thoughts on what's going on there, and any other thing that you think we need to touch on quickly before we wrap up and let you go to sleep tonight. But I want to let you know, I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time along with Ben to look at these issues. It's a hot topic right now, but it's also a very pertinent topic, and I don't want to lose. I don't lose that. We want to keep it at the forefront of the news cycles, is what I'm saying. But some final thoughts, or anything we need to touch on before we leave.
Yeah, my final thought is really that we are extremely thankful. We're thankful towards President Trump for his focus, but towards all of you. I've made so many friends over the last few years in America, also in Michigan. So many media, alternative media, all kinds of podcasts and alternative media channels that just opened up for us, and try to get the message out. And I see the difference. I experienced the difference. I was recently standing here at a small airport in South Africa, and I just saw on the one person on the T-shirt that the one man was wearing, it says Mackinac Island, and I thought, well, that's someone from Michigan. So I went up to him, and he said, yes, he's from Michigan. He actually was here in South Africa on a hunting trip.
Nice.
So he was from actually up the Upper Peninsula in Michigan.
Okay.
And he said to me, "Oh, but you're from the Boer people in South Africa, and I've heard about you on a radio station in Michigan, And I think that's the good thing. There's conservative media who are willing to start talking about what's happening in South Africa, and we must not stop. We must not stop with this. We must go on, get the message out, and also send a warning to our own people, to people in America, to people in Europe, that what happened in South Africa the last century can also happen in your country. You must now protect your country. You must fight for your country. You must safeguard your borders. You must make sure that the next generation of Americans are proud of their country. They love their country. They're patriotic, and they will fight to protect it in the future."
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ben, I'm going to give you your final thought on this, the same, and then we can let Jaco go for the night and wrap it up.
I think it's something that we have to address. We have to find solutions to, and we got to press our political leaders here in America to do something about it too. It's one of these things that there's, without pressure from America, these people are going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And they're
Right.
the bad guys are coming.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we have an opportunity to really help a lot of Christians in need.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope people step up to help Jaco and pressure our own political leaders to take a stance on this and to find ways to give support to President Trump, because he needs it. And the deep state's out to get these people. The media's out to cover up the crimes, and we need to do something about it so that these people don't get wiped off the earth.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jaco, is there any websites that we can? People can get in contact with you? Is there anything?
Yes.
Share some connection. Are you on X?
Yes.
Are you on?
Yes, I'm on X. People are very welcome to follow me on X. I'm on X, and I write about all the things happening in South Africa, on farm murders and all of that. I also do it in English most of the time, so it's very easy. So people can really follow me on X. They can also visit any of my other social media, also on any of the other social media channels. We also have a website. Our organization is Solidarity. So it's solidarity.co.za. That's the South African website. So Solidarity South Africa. You can just Google that. Yes.
Okay. I see. Let's see. I've got Jaco Kleyhans. Do you know what your at is? I want to make sure I don't click on the wrong one.
Yes, on X it's my name and my last name, so it's Jaco Kleyhans. Yeah.
Okay.
Jaco
I see.
Kleyhans.
Were you
Yes.
just recently on with Rob Schmidt?
Yes, that's correct. I was
Okay.
on Newsmax with Rob Smith.
Yeah.
Yes.
Rob's great. All right,
Yes.
we're gonna click on that, click follow. In fact, I'm gonna put it up on the screen real quick for everybody to see it. Spell that out for us again. Go to web. There we go. Spell that again for us, Jaco.
Yes. So my name is Jaco Kleyhans. It's Jaco Kleyhans. So you can follow me on X. I think that's the best way to find out all the latest from South Africa.
Okay. You say a soft J.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, I've been saying Jaco the whole thing, and I should have been saying, but it's difficult for me being a Jeremy,
Yeah.
that
Yes.
we got the harsh J, And a lot of times, so I apologize for that, man. You should have told me.
No,
Nah,
you did it. You did it better than most Americans, so that's perfect. Fine.
Okay. All right. I couldn't quite get your last name exactly the way, but beautiful. All right. I think we're good, guys. One of the things that I do here is at the end of the show when you're in studio. So when you come to Michigan again, I want to try and get you in studio. I'm going to have Ben sign my paper since he's here. And then that's one of the things we do. I've got a whole stack of 5 years worth of shows here. He went up to me today at dinner when he let me know that I said, well, I've been deplatformed a number of different times from the different sites. And he said, yeah, well, I got banned by Google, completely taken out. And I'm like, dude, okay, you did one up to me. But it's been a pleasure. I would love to meet you in person, share a steak or something. Next time you come to Michigan, if you can work it in your schedule, have you here in studio.
Yes.
That would be a blast. Ben, thank you for being across the table from me.
Anytime.
Again, go find Jaco. Jaco.
Yes,
Jaco.
that's right. Thank you. I'll see you in September. I'll see you in September in Michigan.
That'll be awesome. Go find him on X and support the cause. Check out all the stuff that he's posting and like, share, and subscribe, all of that. Of course, on our show, like, share, and subscribe. I know most of my Sunday night viewers will catch up on tomorrow morning. That's what a lot of my people, they are relaxing Sunday night. And so the next day I go, we got this many numbers tonight, and then tomorrow it's like, so everybody make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Go check it out. And I really appreciate my two guests being here tonight and discussing this important issue. And with that, we will see you guys, our audience, on Tuesday for another Tuesday Night Rant, and we'll catch you next time.
This is my brain.
Dad, that's an egg.
Yeah, that's an egg.
Honey,
Dude,
that's an egg.
seriously.
That's an egg.
It's a metaphor.
It's still an egg.
That's an egg.
I would challenge you.
That's an egg.
I know my brain is not actually an egg, okay? It's a metaphor.
Metaphor or not, that's not your brain.
It's just an egg.
Una cerveza para mí. My egg is my brain.
Can I at least have some bacon, maybe some sausage with that egg, though?
Oh, I want some bacon.
I want crepes.
Have some bacon and pancakes with that egg.
I'll take it with cheese.
Extra large brown cage-free eggs.
Can I have your brain with cakes?
A little sausage and a little toast and potato.
That would be great.
Does it have antibiotics?
I don't know, man. I'm not good at this shit.
Well, they got to be able to resist some diseases.
You resist the disease.
Has it got any hormones?
Maybe. It's cage free.
Vegetarian?
Maybe.
Are they vegan?
No, I eat steak.
Never apologize and never explain.
Never apologize.
Yeah.
Never apologize and never explain.